Hello, I want to talk about weeds now. It's interesting actually. I think a lot of people don't see weeds the way they could, and there's a lot of layers to how you could change your view about weeds. But one of these has to do with this idea that I've summarized a little bit in the article about syntropic agriculture, the idea that whenever you cut something, and I've been talking about it in the videos as well, whenever you cut something and keep it juvenile, something that has got enough roots, enough carbohydrates and starch in the roots so they can come back again. Whenever you cut it, what happens is that you're pulsing the entire system. So for example here, there were very tall thistles, and Alan, our volunteer, cleaned them up with a hook and without removing the roots, which might seem like, okay, but they're going to come back, aren't they? Yeah, they're already coming back. Look at that. Now, you might think, that's terrible. That's not what you want. And in some context, you definitely don't want that. I wouldn't want that in my beds because they would overtake the vegetables. But funnily enough, they never go in there because obviously the soil there, it's more like in a woodland, and you wouldn't have thistles in a woodland. They haven't evolved to go into a rich, undisturbed, decompacted, aerated soil. So they struggle to actually get in there and take hold. Whereas over here, which is compacted, it's been disturbed and it's not as fertile, they really want to thrive. They do thrive because that's their role, is to fix a soil that's not perfect, that's in its infancy in terms of succession. Have a look. This area was all disturbed, so this soil is like has experienced a big event and now wants to start building up fertility, structure and stuff like that. So that's why the weeds are thriving here, and we've got some couch grass, some thistles and a lot of other things. But let's go back to the idea of cutting them without removing the roots. What's happening whenever you do that is that the roots are going to send down a lot of exudates into the ground and stimulate microbiology. The whole plant is staying juvenile, so it's not becoming senescent, it's not becoming mature and trying to put on seeds for the next generation and stuff like that, which at that phase they do become very competitive and they take a lot of food away from our crop, which in this case is raspberries. These raspberries will benefit enormously from the cut of the thistle, and therefore indirectly from the presence of the thistle. If you keep cutting it and put all the stuff that you cut either around it as a mulch, like we've done partly here and we put some over there, but even if you remove the tops because you're afraid there might be some seeds or stuff like that, the fact that you're cutting means that the root zone of these raspberries is being inundated with goodness, inundated with microbial activity and sugars and carbohydrates and proteins and amino acids. So it's having an incredible effect, and all the plants that allow you to do that can be used as a tool. You don't have to see them only as a nuisance. Another thing is that they create a lot of biomass. So this is Phacelia actually, this stuff, and it was really green when we put it on the ground, and it had a lot of seeds as well. So now it's self-seeding, and that's a thing that the frost usually kills. It's a beautiful pink plant that we use to attract pollinators and suppress weeds. So in time, rather than the thistles, we'll have Phacelia around here, which is beautiful. It can be easily killed if we need to, but also produces a lot of biomass, so we can cut it down, chop it down and use the stuff that we chop as a mulch. And every time, remember, it will give a pulse to the system. Not as much as a thistle, because Phacelia is an annual, so when you cut it, it actually most of the time just dies and very rarely can come back. So the roots in that case will become compost in the ground, but they won't allow an extra flush of growth, or perhaps just one, but definitely not an infinite number like the thistles. So both of those strategies are really good. Having a plant that you then cut and use as a mulch, or having a plant that you cut continuously. And even though it's an invasive, because you're cutting it continuously, it never manages to spread, and it only becomes a resource. That's what weeds are for. They are meant to get energy from the sun and put it into the ground and fix carbon so that the carbon stays in the soil rather than in the air. Right, so hopefully that gives you a few ideas of how to deal with weeds in places where you can cope with a little bit of disturbance. I want to talk briefly about Chinese leaf, because that's one of those things that gets overlooked. An amazing crop. Look at how beautiful. One of my favorite salad leaves. And obviously when it's in the ground, it looks awful. You know, there's this is all the bits that I took off, and it looks rotten. But then you open, remove the outer leaves, and the beauty of the heart inside is astounding. You know, you could wash this. We're selling them to Rose, who is going to make amazing kimchi from it. There's some big beasts in there, nice and firm. That's what you want. And there's some more here. They come in different varieties and sizes, different colours as well. There's a pink and a green, and a slightly darker green, and a very white one. They're an amazing vegetable to eat, raw, stir-fried, fermented, very quick to grow. It is impressive how quickly they grow. In a month you can get from a small plant like this to a big beast like that. Right, so a question we get a lot is, what if you left a bed empty in your system? Would it still be that weed free? Do you do a lot of weeding? How do you maintain them weed free? And I want to show you 2 beds. This has been left empty, but with a lot of compost on it for 1 month. And this is the amount of weeds we have. A few seeds that came from our own compost, probably. A few weed seeds. There might be actually calendula or other stuff. These can go, with a hoe, you'd kill them in a minute. A few more there. This is a rumex, a dock that needs to be pulled out. Thistle from seed from the neighbouring field, probably another thistle, another thistle, another thistle, and a little bit more stuff there. Wild carrot, mushroom, and that's it. Does it even look like there's weeds? It doesn't, does it? So this is a month I'm not having anything growing. That shouldn't happen. Please bear in mind that shouldn't happen. A bed should look like that, fully covered with plants. And if it's not covered in plants, sooner or later you'll get weed pressure. But if a system has been occultated well, which means kill all the weeds before you start your beds, and then it's kept covered with compost, weeds will take a long time to get in. This is another bed that wasn't topped up with compost, and it was empty for 2 to 3 months actually. We haven't had anything here for ages, and there's a lot more weed pressure, but they're all from seeds, so you can go in there with a hoe and kill them because they don't have strong rhizomes, strong creeping starchy roots from which the weeds can regrow. They're all things that can be removed once and for all, and they won't come back. Okay, so that's the idea. Keep your soil covered with plants, and when you can't, with compost for just a short time, and sooner or later you should be planting plants again, because if you leave this for too long then you'll get weeds again. But they'll come from seeds, which is a great advantage to the ones that come creeping in. Now that it's very clean, I'm going to show you our wash and pack station, which is always an area that more commercially minded growers ask about. We've designed this, and thanks to John who's built it, and it's got 2 parallel lines for washing veg. So we wash salads here, dry them on the screen, or just lay them out so that we can then pack them, and then they get packed on this table. This is a root wash station, so people who have harvested roots can come straight in without interfering with the side flows, and they wash the roots and put them in a box, one of those boxes, and take them to the fridge. The fridge is on the other side inside the barn, so actually that's not ideal. It would have been nice to have a door through here, but we have to go around. And then this is another packing table, and again the same flow. There's all sorts of bags and tapes and scales there and chopping boards, and this is packing, drying, washing, and with the spinning, and this is an extra table just for microgreens or other things that need to be in the shade, or just in case we have extra stuff that we need to process and we need an extra packing table. It's quite a nice space, and a concrete floor so the water can go over there, and there's a sump at the end there which can be emptied once a year, and there's a little bit of a slope so all the water goes over there. On the other side it would have been nice to have another screen, but then it would limit light, so that screen is to avoid the wind, which is the dominant wind is from that southwest direction, and so it brings a bit of shade but also breaks the wind a little bit, even though it's not ideal. And that was done, obviously the structure, the lean-to was done by a professional carpenter, but then the pallets were easy to just add as an extra wall, and they haven't got a support roll. It's just so that we could protect from the wind with that windbreak. Okay, so we got a beautiful team of volunteers today doing the turnover between summer crops and winter crops in the tunnel. And the idea is that we've got all these tomatoes that have been producing throughout the summer. They've been in the ground since the end of May, and they produced starting early July, and they're still producing a little bit, but it's not worth letting them produce any more fruits now because they won't have the time to ripen. So we're going to remove the green ones and sell them as chutney making tomatoes, and the red ones we'll let ripen fully and then sell as normal tomatoes. And then the idea is that we remove the plants like Paul is doing there, and by cutting the roots at the base and leaving the roots in, and just removing anything that sticks out of the surface of the soil, and then tying up the string so that it's ready to be used next year when the tomatoes are going to go in, or the cucumbers are going to go in again. And here we got some tomatoes. So any sign of reddening, of ripening, will mean that these tomatoes will eventually ripen. It might take longer and the flavour might be a little bit blander than they would normally if they ripen in the sun. But a warm, sunny windowsill will make them ripen. And the only thing to watch out is the texture. If they get too dry where they are, they'll go a bit soft. So it might be worth putting them on a windowsill where the sun, not too dry. So the following step is, after removing all the plants and tying the string, is broad forking. Just because the ground in here is heavy clay, very hard, we're just going to add a little bit more aeration. It's particularly hard because it's been very dry in here. We haven't watered in more than a month to let the tomatoes ripen. So Paul is very thoroughly aerating this soil with a broad fork, and then we're adding a layer of 3 centimeters of compost, I would say, and then we're going to transplant lettuces into it. And just 2 hours later, there are beautiful lettuces now in this bed. At the same time, we cleared the side bed which had aubergines. We left a few plants because there are a few fruits maturing. But then we found actually in the bed where the tomatoes were a carrot that had remained from last year. This is just to show you how quickly, with no dig and with this system, you can transition from summer crops. So like a few hours ago, we were still picking tomatoes, and now a few hours later, we already have lettuces in the ground, and in a couple of weeks, we will be harvesting from these quite heavily because there's 4 rows on a 12-meter bed, so that's quite a lot of plants. They're spaced 25 by 20, 25 and 20 across the bed. In principle, they could be 20-20 if you pick them very, very often. And so from basil and tomatoes, in a few hours, you can have lettuces. What we've done, as described in the previous videos, is remove the plants, tie up the string, hang it so that we can use it next year, and then we removed the drip irrigation, which is drip tape. It was very cheap, low pressure type of irrigation, and then we broad forked to improve the aeration. We watered really heavily, applied compost, transplanted and watered again, and we will water every day, perhaps for a week. It depends on how hot and how warm it is in here, but it's worth letting these plants establish really well, especially in the tunnel. They need a lot more water because things dry up very fast. You can see this is already dry, and I watered it this morning. So these plants will need water tomorrow morning again. It's best not to. It's finally that time of the year. The sun is low in the sky even in the morning. Roger looking in between the squashes, and we're harvesting our beautiful autumn crown squash. This is a type of butternut squash, a moscata variety, which has got the shape of a baby pumpkin. So there is a trick there to make sure that they store well. These type of squashes, the butternut family, won't store incredibly well for more than 6 months, but you can still make sure that they store as better as you can let them. So whenever you have that, rather than cutting across there, it's better to cut all around. It's difficult with one hand. There you go. So hopefully with sharp secateurs. There you go. So by doing that, you let this part of the plant heal and seal so that the rot cannot get in. No fungi can get in, and so later on you can make another cut there when the squash has been cured. Now it will be cured in the sun in the polytunnel for up to a week, and then it will go in a warm place above 10 degrees, above 15 preferably, but below 25, and then they can store at those temperatures for up to 6 months in this case, but other squashes will store more than a year, depending on the variety. I have spoken of blackberries in the past, and I thought I'd show you this. You can really see how blackberries are really the forefront of a woodland in some case scenarios. So that's a relatively mature wood. It's not very mature actually, it's in its young phase, but its margin, its edge, is sending forwards the blackberries, and even in front of those other weeds, like docks and other things, to start to colonize the field. Here, this is city park actually, beautifully kept. It used to be a tip, but now it's been let to rewild, and a lot of the trees were already here anyway. But you can really see how the brambles start to colonize new ground, and any sapling of these trees that will germinate here will be protected from rabbits and deer by the thorns of the brambles, and also with their fruits they're attracting the birds to actually bring those seeds in. So it's a great function that they're playing. Now it's harvesting some Chinese leaf, and I want to show you two main things. Around the roots of a plant, if there is lignin around and decaying leaves, you attract a lot of life. Now some of that life you might not want because it's slugs, but a lot of it you do want. Look at these guys living around the root. I've just pulled out a root of the Chinese leaf, and look at the number of roots that are growing into the wooden residue there. So this is an amazing symbiosis between fungi and plants, and the spiders as well there. Look at that spider. Fungi and plants at play. The fungi decomposing the wood and making it into stable organic matter, and within that organic matter a lot of microbes live, and microarthropods feed on them, and then slightly larger animals like these guys and the spiders and the worms feed on those. So this is a bed which was already full of carbon because there was a cover crop initially, and you can now see the full extent of that work that the green manures plus the mulch have done. Without going into much detail, I wanted to just point out something that a lot of us tend to underestimate, and it's the fact that not only pH is important for plant nutrition, but also EH. EH is a measure of the redox potential of your soil in solution. And you know, the best way of thinking about it in very, very rough terms is the highest EH, the more oxygen there is present in your soil, and the lower the EH and the less oxidized and the more reduced your soil is, which is that oxygen is not as available. And so you get a two-dimensional kind of map of the possibilities of how soils are. And the work of Olivier Housson in 2020 showed that within this map you can find evidence in the literature that says where different levels of toxicity, which means an excess of a nutrient, or deficiency, which means not enough of a nutrient, fall within these types of soils. And it seems that obviously favourable conditions are in the middle of this chart, which means where the pH is between 6 and 7 and where the EH is average. So there is an availability of oxygen, but within the soil there's good aggregation. So each aggregate has got the middle, the center, the core, which is anaerobic, and the surface area, which is aerobic. And so there is enough oxygen, but also there is enough water. Obviously, another way of thinking about the EH is there is a lot of water when the EH is low and the soil is reduced in solution, or there is very little. So there's a lot of water down there and there's a little water when there is oxygen. So oxygen and water are kind of antagonizing each other. This shouldn't be the case, and in fact in the ideal soils you should have an average EH. And obviously pH, we know, is very related to nutrition, because at different pH levels some nutrients are more or less available. And the extremes of this are really interesting. So alkaline and reduced in compacted and waterlogged soils, alkaline and oxidized, that would be in cases of, you know, soils which are really alkaline, very rich in calcium carbonate, and possibly under drought conditions and in shade when they're really oxidized. And then you got acid and oxidized. That's typical of very arid areas where the soil is acidified a lot, and also there is a very low organic matter, and so excess of oxygen and acid conditions. And then you got acid and reduced, which is more subtropical, tropical soils, which can have a lot of organic matter in some cases. It depends actually, and well-structured aerobic conditions. Fennel. This is a time of the year when fennel grows a lot easier, so you don't need to do much to avoid bolting, and you can grow also a wide range of varieties. Now these are not fully developed. This is actually going to seed, but it's still an amazingly juicy fennel, and this is on the smaller side. we'll get bigger and bigger fennels, but it depends on the variety, on the spacing as well. So I recommend 25 centimeters grid, so 25 in between rows, but also to choose the right variety. Now in autumn, we like to grow Mantovano as well as Rondo. This is Mantovano, you can see by the shape actually. Rondo is more reliable because you can grow it year round and it produces nice fat bulbs if you provide them with the right conditions. Planting them close blanches them naturally, but also avoids water stress paradoxically, because the canopy will shade the soil and reduce evaporation. So you might think that they compete more, but actually they've got very deep roots, and therefore what's more important is covering the soil. And the fennel is a photosensitive crop, so it will go to seed if the season is such that the day length is increasing. At this time of the year, the day length is going down, and so they don't really want to go to flower, and they form a nice, what we call a male bulb, so a bulb that doesn't produce any, it doesn't go to seed. It's not, there's no difference between male and female for fennel, but in Italy and in other countries, people differentiate between a male energy fennel, which is one that's like this, fat and doesn't have any sign of going to seed, and a female one, which would be more like thin and long. Now this one is a male one that's now becoming a female, but normally you would sometimes have something like this, which is a female fennel, and these ones are very low quality fennels in countries like Italy or Spain, even though in this country they're sold, and also sometimes in northern France they're sold like normal fennel, but they shouldn't, because they've got more fibre and less juice, and they're a lot less sweet. Now you can see how these mushrooms are breaking down coniferous wood chip. So this is very interesting, because a lot of people believe that conifer doesn't break down very easily. Now this has been here for 10 months, I would say, and it's already starting to decompose. It's a type of, look at the mycelium in there. Look at that, it's beautiful, isn't it? Starting to rake into this. So at this stage you can put it in your pathways and it will release nutrients. You can also see some worms in there. So it is at the stage where it's starting to become more usable, whereas normally it would be so full of tannins and terpenes and resins that it wouldn't decompose, and also it would stop the growth of things around it. But when it's at this stage, it's already decomposing, and these fungi are making a lot of nutrients available to your surrounding vegetables. I wouldn't put it on the beds, but in the pathways it's good. You can really see how it's breaking down there. So today I want to show you a problem that some of you might have, or will be encountering when going no dig. Do you see this plant? It's not as happy as its fellow lettuce seedlings. It's been in here for 1 week now, and usually about this time, well, it can be as soon as after a few days from the transplant, this can happen, and it's the work of a pest called a wireworm. And I'm going to show you, hopefully we'll find it in there so that I can show it to you. Okay, so the way to identify it and to find out is to pull up a plant, open up its root zone, and then normally you'll find this little guy. Sometimes you can find 2 or 3, up to 5 we've found in the past. There we go. I'll move the focus on this guy if I can. So the wireworm is yellow orange and it's got a tiny red head. So hopefully you can see that at one end it's a little bit more red. That's very hard to, there you go. So the best way of taking care of it is to break it, kill it like this. I usually do it with 2 hands, but now I've got 1 hand with the phone. But you want to break it in 2 so you're sure that it's dead. Very hard to do actually, because it's got quite a thick skin. So now I know this guy is dead because it's kind of split in 2. And I'm going to drop it on the ground. Then I'm going to remove this plant. And I go about and scout for plants that have followed the same unfortunate fate. Now wireworms live and parasitize on grass. So they are common when you convert a pasture or a lawn into a no-dig vegetable garden. A vegetable garden, a no-dig vegetable garden in particular, can you see this one? It's obviously not very happy. I'm going to pull it up. Oh, look, it's already been broken, so we might not even find the guy in there. And this is a particular problem specific to no-dig gardens, because we don't dig, we don't till, and these guys are usually killed or discouraged by tillage. So we need to deal with them either by doing one first cultivation, if we know there is a big problem in the area we are going to establish our vegetable garden. So, you know, a one-off tillage. I didn't find the actual one in here, and I suspected I wouldn't, because the plant was already eaten, so this guy might be already somewhere else doing some damage. Unfortunately, we might find another dead plant. And so, yeah, a one-off event, tillage event, might be a good idea. But otherwise, you want to just be prepared to lose up to 50% of your seedlings the first year. And we did that in the first spring when we started. We lost a lot of lettuce. This was, specifically in lettuce, was a big thing. A little bit on peas as well. But this one is gone as well. But lettuce seems to be their favourite. Now, some people have seen it on beetroots. We never had it on beetroots. We've had it sometimes on spinach. But mostly on lettuce. And so what we did when we found out that we had this problem, rather than tilling, because it was a bit too late now, we had made all the beds and everything, we just decided to pick them up one by one as we found them. And the way to find them is to spot a plant that really is like the ones I showed you. Okay, and as you find them, you remove them, and in time that bed will be clean. The problem with wireworms is that it takes up to 7 years to become an adult. So it's the larvae of a beetle called the click beetle, and it takes up to 7 years to become an adult. Now, another strategy, rather than tillage or picking them one by one by hand, is to plant a green manure of white mustard, Synapsis alba. That fumigates the soil and releases a biochemical that makes the wireworm go away, or even sometimes mature, right, kind of go into an adult form a lot quicker, within a few months, which is quite miraculous, isn't it, if you think about it. Now, I haven't looked into this very carefully, but I know a lot of people have gotten rid of wireworm this way, so it's worth knowing it. So that was the wireworm. Now, luckily, I managed to show you one specimen. Unfortunately, the other plants that I removed didn't have the guy in them. I'm going to try the last one here. I can tell that this guy is not happy here, so I'm pretty certain there is something in its root zone. Okay, let's do this last. There you go, and you can see it's usually between the stem and the root ball. Okay, and so the thing to do here is, I'm afraid a bit cruel, but to kill it or give it to your chickens or something like that, and then you can leave the roots in place. Always check if there isn't another one, but usually if there is, it's going to be in the root ball. And then remove the top of the plant and put it in the compost. And slowly you'll get rid of all of them. There you go, there's another one there. And as you've done that, that bed will be clean for many months. They shouldn't come back unless you plant a grass green manure or something that they really like parasitizing the roots of. I didn't find one in here. Alright, so I'll leave you to it, and good luck with your no-dig gardening. Okay, so I want to show you something. This is not one of the best beds, actually. That we have a few violas. These are flowers that have self-seeded, which is not ideal. A few thistle weeds. But apart from that, I want to show you something very significant, which is how slugs, there's a slug there, do not damage healthy adult plants. And the only things they're interested in this case, when the plant is healthy, is the decaying leaves. You can see where all the damage is. It's on the old and rotting leaves, whereas the young ones is where they sleep. They don't make any damage. I'm going to open it's difficult with one hand, but I'm going to open a salad to show you. But I might find slugs here, but they will be just sleeping in the lettuce. No, there's none there actually in this plant. Let's see in this one. Yeah, you see there's a slug there? But the leaf it's on, it's fine actually. There's a tiny bit of damage there. And actually this leaf was already started to decay. But the young leaves of the same plant are completely untouched. Huh? So that's to prove that slugs are really interested in rotting material, in decomposing material. and not so much, young, healthy plant. And that is even not one of the healthiest beds in the garden. You can see there's a bit of weeding to be done, but things are looking good. And if we went to the healthiest beds, which are on that side, you'd barely see any damage from slugs whatsoever. But there are slugs. It's full of slugs actually. They're always leaping in the plants, but they're not making a lot of damage. So number one control system for slugs is to keep your plants healthy. They like this stuff. They don't like the good stuff. Celery is a great crop, and this year, despite the drought, it's grown really, really well. Victoria F1, very good variety for this climate, for the UK. And a secret, obviously now we're running, very soon we're running out of time. Very soon these will start to feel the cold and not perform very well. So we're harvesting the entire plant and selling it as a whole celery for a very cheap price, actually, in my opinion, which is $1.50 for such a beast. It will last a very long time. Anyway, but if I was growing celery for myself, for a small holding or a self-sufficiency, what I would do is harvest the outer stalks and be quite drastic with that. Just leave a few in the middle, and then every so many weeks, perhaps even a month, I would redo the same operation. And so I make sure that I get some of the more fibrous ones on the outside, but also some of the more tender ones on the inside every time. But then I leave enough to the plant so that it can grow back. I would never harvest a whole plant like this until the end of the season, really. But for sale, we got about 200 plants out there, so we calculated even if we give entire plants, we can keep them going until it makes sense to keep them going. Okay, so Paul has very diligently cleared this bed. There were carrots in it. I'm going to show you how it was. It was like this. So half of the bed was empty, and a portion of the bed, not as much as half actually, had carrots. And he harvested the carrots, and then he's done a bit of weeding, both by hand and with an oscillating hoe. Perhaps, Paul, do you want to demonstrate how the oscillating hoe was used?
Yeah, good timing, just about to do that.
Perfect, fantastic. So the oscillating hoe, you've seen it in another video perhaps in the past, but it's always worth, for those of you who are new to the channel, it's a very good tool because it slices through the top inch of the soil, and it has two blades, so you can push and pull and cut through any weeds, but also it's a good way to get that top mulch nice and fluffy, ready to be sown into. Sometimes you can get stuck into a root ball, so make it sharp. Notice that this is not disturbance. Some people think, oh, dig, you shouldn't be disturbing the soil. We're not disturbing the soil, we're disturbing the mulch. There's no clay showing up, so we're only disturbing the compost on the top. If you start hitting the clay, it means that there isn't enough mulch, and that would be a problem because it's disturbing then the soil. So after this action, Paul removed the wood chip from the bed, and then next step will be sowing some green manures. So from carrots to green manures in, how long was that? Half an hour? So very fast, very quick. The soil is remaining undisturbed and covered with living plants. Anything you want to add, Paul?
The strings.
Oh, the strings are important, aren't they? To get a feel for what the area is that you're trying to work on. And if at this stage, if the wood chip in the pathways was a bit low, it would be a good time to top it up. All right, thank you, Paul. So this is the raking stage where we get the bed nice and fluffy. And I was saying earlier about the mulch. So in this bed, this is 3 years old. So there is a lot of compost. We haven't added any compost at this stage because this is quite stable organic matter now. So even though with the oscillating hoe, Paul was going at least an inch deep, he wasn't encountering a lot of resistance at any of the underlying soil. If in your beds you haven't got to a stage where this is the case, so they're younger or the situation is not as good yet, you want to stay a bit shallower with the oscillating hoe. You don't want to hit any of the underlying soil, and then you also want to add a little bit of compost if you're going to plant something like a cash crop after this. In our case, we're planting a green manure, so we don't really want to add any more compost, and we wouldn't need to even if we were to plant a cash crop, because the soil is really nice and fluffy. You can see this up to, down to almost 2 inches. There's very, very, very crumbly soil, which is a mix of organic matter of compost and the underlying clay. So it's fantastic stuff that's been worked by the worms, and it's mostly organic material really. We're not seeing much of the clay. The bits of clay that there are so small because they've been mixed by the worms, so that you know, they're not clumps, so the danger of disturbing them is very low.
Pressure's on.
Nobody knows who you are. So this is the zipper opening a furrow. You know you'll be in the next video tour, Paul. And now I need to take a video of... Hey, go for it, I'm listening. There is... Oh, you want me to come with you and show me something?
Yeah, there's a bit of fibre that's in this soil. There's some fibrous stems and they haven't decomposed.
So Bernie and Paul are sowing some green manures.
Hi!
So you might be happy to see some different faces for once. And so Paul has
Comes the zipper.
very masterfully made some furrows with the zipper, and then sowed some some field beans, and now he's closing the furrow with the zipper. Any hoe would do, but it's nice with a zipper. It's a much quicker and neater job. And Bernie is planting some oats. You can see the black oats quite thickly. Because we have a lot of seeds, we're not really worried about that. You could have gone slightly thinner, but it's fine. It's better, you know, to get full germination and coverage. And then in this one we had some mustard, and then they've been told to be creative and choose their own mix of green manures, and we'll see what pops up. And we're doing 5 rows. 4 would be fine as well. Even 3 would be fine, but it's nice to have a lovely coverage, even though it slows everything down. So we'll have 5 rows of green manures, different species. The research says that if you have 4 families or 5 families, you get much better humification. That is the grasses, the canopods, the brassicas, the legumes, and another one that I can't remember. So the idea is we want to add as many families of green manures in the same bed as possible, so their roots are all intertwined and produce some lovely cake for our microbes and some lovely humus as a result. So Bernie here, amazing volunteer, is doing some work on the endive. Can you explain what you're doing, Bernie?
Yeah, hi. So I'm cutting quite low down to the on the bottom because they're all starting to rot. We don't want them to be wasted. So the new growth will come back up here, so and we'll keep the slugs away as well a little bit that way. And what I'm doing here is I'll take there's lots of worms in here as well, but I'll take the heart out of the endive, and then this is beautiful to eat still. The outer leaves are all rotten, but this is all beautiful here. So there you go. And then this goes into the compost, which will make amazing compost.
And this goes in now.
Then we tidy all this up, so there's no slugs, food for the slugs here. So
fantastic, thanks
then,
Bernie.
Yeah, is that okay? Or
yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, okay.
And look at what the
Is that
quality
okay
of
there?
these leaves.
Yeah.
They're beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, there might be the odd
one, yeah.
the odd one
Okay.
that needs
Yeah.
removing,
Yeah.
but they're looking
Okay.
really good.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what Bernie was saying. There's a lot of worms,
Loads of them. Yeah.
lots of composting worms that live in the endive. That's to prove that this is such a great plant to improve soil. Look at the roots that are coming right to the surface here, just because of the protection that the leaves give. And also the roots are very deep, so this is doing a lot of decompaction. It's an amazing plant. More people should eat it. So hopefully we've convinced you to plant some more endive in your gardens. Thank you, Bernie.
That's okay.
So another effect of cutting things like Bernie is doing here is that it also stimulates via the root mycelial network all the neighbouring plants. Now in this case, Raj, it doesn't matter so much. Raj, it doesn't matter so much because they're all close to endives anyway. But over here, where we have the chard and the lettuce, cutting the endive does improve the growth of the neighbouring plants. Shh! Alright, Roger is not in agreement with this. And to give you a feel, this is how the chicory, the endive looks. It's all kind of rotten, but then when you go in there, there's a lot of goodness to it. And this is also true of radicchio sometimes. So you see here, this radicchio head looks like it's rotting. But if you scrape off the outside, you peel off the outer leaves, the inside is nice and blanched and completely sealed, so it doesn't rot, it stays oxygen and waterproof. And so it does keep for a very long time in the field, even when the outside part is rotting. So it's worth knowing this about chicories, that they're a great crop and they can be left outside until the first frost and even a little bit after that, and then you use them when you need them. And this is a good job, very clean, so no slugs can hide in here, no mice, and lots of roots growing into the compost. I was going to show you a variety of sprouting broccoli, well, mix of varieties. So this is from Cavolo Romanesco, side shoots after removing the big head. And this is Bell Star, you could use Natalino for that purpose. And you know, it's giving really nice side shoots at this stage. And then we have some purple sprouting in there. I think they've all been bought. I'm at the market at the moment. There you go. And this is Rudolph. So you get beautiful side shoots from these varieties, and the leaves are really tender and lovely. And this was full, but it's now selling quite nicely at the market. Okay, so I want to talk about a problem that some of you will be experiencing in this at this time of the year, which is cracking. So this type of cracking can happen in radishes. This is a watermelon radish, beautiful radish which has got an inner purple red flesh. It can happen to cabbages. I'll show you a few examples on cabbages. Where are they? Here you go. There you go. Cracking, exploding cabbage. This one is about to explode too. This one too. There you go. There's another one there, which has just exploded. I'll show you some very dramatic cases of explosion. So essentially, this type of problem happens in one of two cases: in root vegetables, okay, like radishes, carrots, turnips, and things like that. It happens when watering has been inconsistent. It can happen also in thin peel citrus fruits and in other fruits. There you go. This is an extreme case of a cabbage that has exploded. There's another one there. So in fruit and in roots, this happens when the watering has been inconsistent, and in particular when you had a very dry summer and then you have a lot of rain in the autumn or late summer or early winter. So after a drought you get a lot of rain, and so all the water doesn't it kind of flushes into the fruit or the root, and it makes it crack. All the tissues have become very tough and cicatrized, and so when all that water comes in, there's no elasticity in the tissues of the plant, and so it explodes. The second case scenario is for cabbages when they get too big, because what happens to a cabbage when it gets very big and it finishes, its life cycle and it's ready to be harvested, really. Not its life cycle, sorry, it's not its life cycle, but it's its production cycle. So at this stage, this cabbage needs harvesting. If you don't harvest it and it keeps raining, there's no way for it to grow anymore, because these outer leaves are sealing the heart. And so what happens is the plant wants to grow, and it starts putting pressure from within, because the plant grows from the tip, and the tip is just sealed into the head. And so it puts pressure and it makes the whole thing explode. That tip, the growing tip, is in there. Might be visible here. It puts pressure on the whole structure, which is completely sealed, and that pressure makes it explode. And sometimes it will happen when it's in your hands, and it makes an amazing noise. All the tension and all the pressure waves that travel through the solid with all these layers, it makes a big noise. But actually, what happens is just very slowly opens up, and it keeps opening until you remove it. So now this has gone really completely open. And hopefully you won't have that problem, but if you have it, you know how to prevent it now. So regular watering in the hot and dry season, and also in this case, harvest your cabbages when they're ready. So that should be easy enough. So this is the flower forest, as I call it. It's really a syntropic style culture. Well, it's this syntropic style polyculture of flowers. So we got the problem with weeds has been completely removed by letting edible flowers self-seed. So every single plant you see, there's only one weed that I can see, and it's that one. But in here, believe it or not, even though this is the weed, even though there are plenty of plants and plenty on coverage, I can't see any of the soil or even the wood chip or the compost. These are all edible flowers. There's chamomile, there's lavatera, which is this beautiful flower here, it's just germinating now. And then we got calendulus, and then we got nasturtiums of different varieties, and then we've got tagetes, French marigold, violas, kind of mini pansies, and then we got some flowers. Let's go that way. I just don't want to go in because that would be stomping on things. Different types of nasturtiums there, beautiful nasturtium mat here, and then we got that beautiful salvia. Let's go closer to that one. So it's actually this is the chamomile from earlier in the season, and there you go, this is the beautiful salvia. There's an interesting bug there as well. And so you see that there's couch grass on this side, but it can't really penetrate because it's such a dense forest of, I'm calling it a forest, but obviously it's just a polyculture of flowers. So that gives you an idea for a corner that you want to preserve for wildlife. Let plants self-seed, and they'll sort themselves out in terms of the niches that they want to fill. The key is to, see there's some fennel there, is to interplant initially something that's tall, so stratification, what we call layering of stratification, something tall, something medium, and something low. So then when they self-seed, you have some structure, some skeleton with the taller plants, and you have also different layers, and so there's different types of foods for microbes underground, but obviously for insects, and different types of habitats and shelter and pockets and niches. And this really resembles what you have in a normal ecosystem. There's a cosmos here, which is not edible, but it's also another flower. And that thing, the yellow thingy that you might have seen there, that's purslane, summer purslane, that stuff there, which is another edible salad. So hopefully that gives you an idea that you could apply in wildlife strip in your garden. So this is an interesting way of using green manures, which some of you might find it's too space wasteful, but not very space economical. But actually, it's very time economical and also very, very good for the soil. So there was Phacelia here, very tall Phacelia in June and July and May. And then we removed it. I crimped it down, just pushing it down, and removed the tops and left the roots in. And then we planted French beans and beetroots in the middle. And essentially what's happened is some of the seeds of the Phacelia, when I crimped it, fell on the ground, and they germinated after the beans were removed. So we had the beans produced for several months, and the beetroots are still in here. When we removed the beans, there was more light for the seeds of the Phacelia to germinate, and this is the Phacelia. And now the Phacelia is taking over again without us needing to sow it. So this ground where the beans were, which would otherwise be left empty, is being filled by the Phacelia on its own. And it's a really beautiful system. I really like it, because rather than us under-sowing and buying Phacelia seeds and finding space and time in there to sow, this has all happened on its own, which is how it would happen in nature. A succession that keeps the soil covered with very little input, with zero virtually input. Now, if I wanted to plant something in there, I would remove the Phacelia and plant something in there. Not necessarily everywhere, but just as much space as I need. And the whole soil would remain, the whole area would remain covered with either productive plants like the beetroots or whatever I want to put in that gap, and Phacelia, which is very good for pollinators and roots, radical underground improvement of the soil, and also for microbes and for weed suppression.